I'm Michelle Camilleri, and this is my view or review of The Prestige. The Prestige was an interesting movie. It was based on these two young men who were obsessed with magic and obsessed with getting the greatest trick. And they had issues with figuring out who they were and where they held a place in society. And part of that is their identities. And this critique is going to be about the personal identity themes that we see in the film. In the film, we see these two young men. They're Borden and Angiers. And one of the theories for personal identity is that you're the same person at 4 as you are at 30. And another thought process or theory for personal identity is you are not the same person at 4 and 30. You are different people. So that is best shown in the fact that these two were friends as young children, and they started to kind of come up together in the magic world. And as young children, they used to play together, do magic together, stuff like that. But they had a falling out after Angier's wife died. So their identity wasn't tied together anymore. So who are they? And what did that change who they were? Did that make them different people? Not quite sure. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that we're trying to ascertain in this film. As you go through the film, Angiers is creating copies of himself. He's replicating himself with a machine that Tesla has invented. And that brings up a few more points of personal identity. Personal identity also, it says there's a continuation of consciousness. And it was Locke, I believe, who said that there was a continuation of consciousness, and that is what created who we were. The question then becomes, as he is replicating himself, is there a continuation of consciousness, or is it just a creature, just a replication, just a copy of himself, without his thoughts, his memories? And Borden there's also a question for him with continuation of consciousness, because he also had a copy. His copy was a twin. It was a copy he had from birth. And there is a continuation of consciousness in their story, because as twins, they were living one life. To some degree, there was a continuation of consciousness because they were living one life. They were pretending to be the same person. He was the double for this great trick. And so they'd live with his wife, and they would play their part. They played like they were one person and not two separate and distinct people. His wife got a little suspicious because she would always tell him, on some days, I know that you love me, and other days, I know that you don't. And so that brings up a question. They were so obsessed with magic that they felt like they could live one life. That brings up the question of, was there a continuation of consciousness? Because part of the continuation of consciousness is kind of our memories. Our memories make us who we are and what we are, and it helps continue our identity from one to the next. And they had the same memories to some extent because they lived the same life, only half of it. Part of I think it was Eric Olson. It was Eric Olson. And he's a philosopher that talks about animalism. And he says we're just all human animals. That's what we are. We don't have moral ethics. We don't have thought processes. We don't need that. We're just animals. We have instinct like any dog or cat or monkey would have. And because he says that it doesn't matter. It's not necessary for us to have a continuation of consciousness. It's not necessary for us to have these memories. It's not necessary for us to have any of that. And so he goes on to say that we will just persist the way animals would persist to survive. And this is brought out in the film a little bit when they made a copy of the cats. And the cats went off, they were fighting, they were against each other, they were rivals, and they were fighting. And they went off into the forest. And it's further brought up when Angier 1 shot Angier 2. So you can see in this film there's a lot of personal identity questions. In fact, it doesn't answer as many questions as you think. It brings up more questions. This is a really good film to see. You should watch it.